welcome to the summer edition of Kansas City SQL Server User Group. Summer marks a time when we are starting with a new round of speakers this year, and we have Dan and Jocelyn kicking it off for us. I feel like we should have fireworks or something.
Right. At least a fanfare, something. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Right in line with the July 4th holiday coming up. Today's presentation covers analyzing Power BI performance from desktop to service. This topic is a pain point for many companies and database professionals, so thank you so much for presenting this for us today. I know a lot of us are really going to use this. This is a live session, so I will be monitoring questions as they come in, and we will cover them at the end of the presentation. For the audience, this session is recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Once the recording is ready, I will place the link inside the Meetup event and post them far and wide on various social media platforms. If you miss any of those, you can check them out on our YouTube channel to see our latest and greatest listings. And with that, I will turn it over to you two.
All right, Jocelyn, you want to go ahead and get the slide presentation going? I am looking forward to seeing this on TikTok, since you mentioned this going on social media. I don't know how you do that, but all right. So this presentation, as we said, from desktop to service, and we kind of wanted to stress that it is going to be kind of demo heavy, and we don't necessarily have the best timing yet. I say we, it's me. I don't know how my timing is on the demos, so we may run long, but we definitely want to hold questions to the end if possible, unless it really needs to be in there. But Jocelyn, if you want to go ahead to the first slide, just to introduce myself, my name is Dan Szepesi, and I put the phonetic spelling there for a reason, because my last name is pretty tough to pronounce. I have been in IT 20 plus years, I guess, almost 25, and really have been all over the place. I started out in managed hosting, which was kind of like cloud for dinosaurs. I supported SharePoint for quite some time, and then I have moved over to the BI space. I specialize mostly in Power BI and Power BI performance, probably because my visual skills are just not that impressive, so I need to worry about the data side of things. And I've been doing a lot more data engineering as well. But Jocelyn, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Jocelyn Porter. I'm currently a data engineer at 3Cloud and work alongside Dan. I mainly focus on Power BI, and I'm really excited to teach you all about data modeling and making sure that you have an optimized data model for greater performance with your Power BI tenant.
All right, we can go to the next slide. So obligatory, hey, these are the people that pay me. We are both consultants with 3Cloud. 3Cloud is very much 100% Microsoft cloud focused. It's funny that we got this deck from marketing, but they haven't updated it with the 2024 Partner of the Year type things that we want. I think we're finalists. I don't know if we actually won the whole thing, but you know, you're supposed to be impressed, so yay. But if you go to the next slide, specifically, we work in what's called managed data. And so we basically, I guess I can't drive it. I got to just keep waving at Jocelyn to advance the slide there. Just pull all three bullets up and I'll kind of ramble through them there. So typical IT consulting consists of having a project team come out, deploy something, close up shop, roll out. Managed data, we are more about building the relationship with customers. And so we do support, as you would expect from a managed services type group, but we also kind of position ourselves for long-time strategic consulting as well. So our contracts are, a year at a time. They're for buckets of hours. And really, it's all about when everything's broken, we step in, we fix, we stabilize, but then it's like we want to optimize, we want to look to the future, we want to help guide customers, right? So our focus is in Microsoft BI. So it's a lot of Power BI, Azure Data Factory. We're morphing it to Fabric. We do have Databricks people. I'm not one of them, but we do have those resources as well. So that's the managed data team. We both, I don't know, Jocelyn, between the two of us, it's probably like 6, 7, 8 customers, something like that. So we do get to see a wide variety of customers as well. Next slide.
And I can cover a little bit more about the agenda that we're going to be focusing on today. So first, I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the Power BI architecture, a little bit more about Power BI Desktop, what that does, the engine that serves to power Power BI, especially the modeling aspect of it, which is SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular, and a little bit more about the history of Power BI, or how it came to be, and the steps that came in that process. Then we'll get more into the demos, which is more of Dan's bread and butter, where we will show you what to do if you have slow visuals, how you can monitor what's happening in your Power BI model, and especially visual related in that aspect. Then I'll let you know a little bit more about the import model and dataset refreshes within Power BI service, and really what's going on behind the scenes there. Then we will demo what to do if you have a slow refresh for that import data model, and see what we can glean from the information that we have for Power BI refreshes. Then I'll dig a little bit more into Power BI Fabric capacities and what we can glean from those. And then lastly, we'll close out with a demo regarding capacity performance and log analytics. So excited to get started there. All right, so that brings us to our first point, which is Power BI architecture. So what is Power BI? Power BI is basically a collection of software services, apps, and connectors that allow you to connect to different data sources, transform those data sources, and then model that. And then after you model that, you can take those tables that you've transformed and transform them into visualizations and create multi-page reports. The first part of Power BI that we're going to be focusing on today is Power BI Desktop. And this is the main engine that supports Power BI and all of that functionality that we all know and love. Within Power BI Desktop, users will be able to connect to data, transform that data, and model it. And then from there, we can create visual reports, and then we will publish it to Power BI Service, which is the web interface for Power BI. And Power BI Service is really the main portion where you can take those reports that you've created and share them across your organization, and make sure that you share those wonderful reports that you've worked so hard and to model and create. And then lastly, we have the Power BI mobile app, which is essentially the on-the-go version of Power BI Service. This is where you can look at your Power BI reports on your mobile device, such as iOS and Apple. So altogether, these three portions create what we all know and love as Power BI. But for the purpose of today's demonstration, we're going to be focusing on Power BI Desktop. So what is Power BI Desktop? Power BI Desktop has many capabilities, but the three main drivers of the platform are: one, ETL. So this is where you're going to extract, transform, and load data using Power Query and data connectors. There's also data modeling aspects of it. So this is where you're going to form relationships between fact and dimension tables. And then what's really interesting about this part is that the data modeling aspect, that engine, is that full SSAS tabular engine. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that down the road. And then lastly, presentation. You're going to take all of the data modeling aspects that you had created and transformed from before, and transform them into actionable insights, such as graphs, charts, pie charts, and so on, so that you can create a visual story. So all three of these aspects are extremely important when it comes to performance. At the root, if you have a data model that isn't fully optimized or performant, you may see an impact all the way down to the visual level. So it's important to know how to create a fully functioning, well-performing data model first and foremost. And to be able to do that and to assist in doing that, we can start logging information that goes on behind the scenes when you create that data model and refresh that in Power BI service. So that leads us to ask ourselves a couple questions. What do we do if our visuals are slow to load? If we look into our Power BI service reports and we see that there's a visual that's just lacking, if it's taking a little bit too long to load, what do we want to do there? How can we fix that? How can we see what's going on in the background? As well as what happens if our data set refresh is taking a while? If we're monitoring it in Power BI service and it's taking over an hour to fully refresh, what's going on there? What can we do to speed that up and make it more optimized? And lastly, what do we do when we see capacity spikes? If we are able to see capacity spikes within our tenant, how can we diagnose what exactly is going on? How do we see what visuals are taking too long to load? What queries can we do to fix, or what queries are taking too long within this capacity spike, and what memory is being consumed there? So that really leads us to start digging into the core engine of Power BI. What makes Power BI so powerful, and what drives those decisions and can be a cause of a lot of that heartache for Power BI. So moving on to the core engine of Power BI, which is SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular. So what is SSAS? SSAS is essentially a data engine, also known as Vertipack. It allows you to create semantic data models for BI, data analysis, and reporting tools like Fabric or Power BI, also Excel and reporting services. So what SQL Server Analysis Services really does in Power BI, essentially, it is that main driver, and then that ETL process and visual process is wrapped around it. How does this work in Power BI? Essentially, what you're going to want to do first is create that semantic model in Power BI Desktop that uses that Vertipack engine. And then next, you'll want to publish publish that model to the Power BI service. From there, you can create and share reports using that model that you have just created. And then the reports can be shared across the organization in the Power BI service. So essentially, Vertipack powers everything that you want for that data model, and then everything around it, including the ETL process and creating those visualizations and reports, are just extra add-ins for Power BI. So now, those of you who are more visual, like myself, I'm going to pass it over to Dan to explain a little bit more about the analysis services architecture and a little bit more about our friends at SQL BI.
I wanted to call this out because I literally, this is a screen capture from a video series that SQL BI puts on. Yeah, I guess it's kind of weird to have a consultant giving props to another consultant, but if you are looking to understand the internals, the performance, how the engine works, this is Alberto and Marco's the other one. If you're around Power BI nerds, often you might hear them talk about the Italians. That's these guys. SQLBI.com. I can't recommend them enough for the video series that they have. I literally, even on Twitter the other day, I was saying, these guys pretty much helped me build a career in Power BI, coming out of SharePoint and then sliding into this. This particular screen capture is from one of their series called Mastering Tabular. And it's just kind of interesting. I wanted to put it here because I wanted to show that, we have this semantic model and we talk about building a semantic model. I think it's interesting if you come from a SSAS background and you did multidimensional, right? You learned MDX and you had rollup and molap for your data access, right? Well, Tabular just is built right in there alongside of that. And so for your tabular models, DAX is your business language that you use. And then there's the Vertipack engine. And then there's direct query, which direct query is just if I'm going to interact directly with a source like SQL or something like that, Power BI can actually generate SQL queries that probably DBAs would scoff at, but it'll generate SQL queries and interact directly that way. So I like this here, but I also wanted to put that plug in. I did ask their permission if I could, take the screen capture here. If you are really looking to dive into internals of Power BI or analysis services, because these guys have been doing it forever, they've got a ton of articles, they've got blog posts, they got videos. They're basically celebrities within the Power BI world, which I often forget is a really tiny world, but to me, it's huge. Okay, so that's it for that slide.
All right. So thank you, Dan. And then as a little preface before we move on, in order to fully understand Power BI and how it formed, we're going to go over a brief history of Power BI, where it came from and where it's going. So first, I'd like to take note that in 2010, Power Pivot was introduced. And what Power Pivot was basically a free Excel add-in that allowed users to begin using and working with modeling aspects with large data sets. And this is the main point that we wanted to start with, because it is the first instance of that SSAS tabular. So from there, in 2011, Power View was introduced as another Excel capability, and it allowed users to create visuals with their data models using Power Pivot. So it was an extension of Power Pivot, which allowed you to create charts and graphs and make sure that you have actionable insights based on what you have. Now, this Power View was discontinued in October of 2021, but you'll see how it is incorporated in Power BI. Now, skip a couple years. In 2013, Power Query was introduced, and this was mainly the ETL driver behind Power BI. But still, within Excel, this allowed users to connect to data using data connectors, and allowed you to fully transform and load all that data. So as you can see, leading up, we have the first instance of SSAS, which is that model aspect of Power BI. Power View, which is creating the visuals and reports, and then Power Query, which is that ETL aspect for you. Then in 2014 and 2015, it was a pretty quick turnaround, but Power BI was introduced. In 2014, the first instance of Power BI was released as just a sole web-based interface, which is similar to our Power BI services that we have now. And then in 2015, Power BI Desktop was released, which allowed you to combine all of the aspects of Power Pivot, Power View, and Power Query all in one. So that's essentially how Power BI came to be, and it's always growing from there. So what do we want to, so how do we go from being able to extract data, transform it, load it, and then model it, just to create these wonderful reports that have these stunning visuals, and then realize, hey, this visual is taking too long to load. How can we make this better, and how can we optimize it? The very first step that we need to take is starting to log that information and do a little bit of background research. So now I'll punt it over to Dan, and he can give us a short little demo on what to do if we have slow visuals within our reports.
Short demo being relative, of course. So I actually just decided to add this here. Just again, remember, I said this earlier, maybe people weren't on. It definitely wasn't in the recording, but we kind of put this presentation together to try to encourage SQL DBAs, people with strong SQL internals understanding or familiarity, to show them some of the tools and things that you can get to get into the Power BI performance side of things. If I am inside of a report in Power BI, the first thing I'm going to want to do is go into the workspace here and notice that there's a report layer and there's this semantic model. We've thrown that term around a couple times. If I want to start investigating things here, I can go to this ellipsis and download this file. And this is going to be downloaded as a PBIX file. So I'm going to just jump in here. And so this is now, I've opened that PBIX file with Power BI Desktop, and I'm on a blank page, but let's go over to this slow visual here. And this is nothing pretty. All it is just a table here, but you notice that it's sitting here running slow. Back in the day, we used to say 8 seconds for a page to load if you're IIS support or anything like that. It's like 1 or 2 seconds now, and you're going to start having users complain about things. So you notice there was definitely a lag there. The first set of tools that I want to introduce is inside of Power BI Desktop. If you go to View, there is this Performance Analyzer. Now, there's several different ways to access it. You can use this button here. You can go from over here on the right side. I typically uncheck it and check it just so I can get it to pop up in the window here. Now, what this is going to do is launch this Performance Analyzer blade here. I'm going to start recording. And then really all I want to do is just refresh the visual. And Performance Analyzer is sitting here and monitoring it, and it's going to give me a readout when it's done of how long it took to load the various parts of that visual. So we're at like 11 seconds. If I expand this, you can see that it breaks it down into these particular sections here. In this particular situation, honestly, I was just throwing together ugly DAX until I got something that ran slow, right? I don't have any magic. We're not going to worry about the DAX or why it's slow, but I did just want to kind of break these down. This means here that the majority of the time is being taken to execute the DAX query. Visual display, 119 milliseconds. Obviously, that's lightning quick. This other category here, if you go to an actual Power BI report and there's like a ton of visuals on the page, and when you look at this and the other is the highest number, a lot of times that's telling you is just you've got a lot of visuals on the page. And so the time that the visuals wait for other visuals to finish rendering, all that gets slopped under this other category here. So this is very quickly, we can start to tell, okay, what visual on the page is slow, what's slow about it. But there's a couple different things we can do. I'm actually going to click on this copy query here, and I have DAX Studio installed. And literally it's daxstudio.org, I think is where the download is for that. Since it's installed on my machine, when Power BI Desktop launches, it'll show up in this external tools, so I can click it and launch that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that query and I'm going to use DAX Studio to kind of break down a little bit. What is that query doing and where is it slow? One thing I do want to point out here that Jocelyn mentioned, we talked about Power BI Desktop having an entire instance of SSAS Tabular. When I open DAX Studio from Power BI Desktop like that, it automatically is connecting to that instance. So you can see it here running on localhost, and that's the port. I'm going to need that for the next demo, but I'm just pointing that out now. So I know I'm connected. Here's my tables over here. Here's my fact tables and my dimension tables. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it. And I will say right up front, it's going to look like gobbledygook. Even if you are good with DAX, the particular way that Microsoft writes these, the DAX for these visuals can be a little bit hard to follow. But it really doesn't matter, right? We're just trying to get a sense of what is taking a while to execute. So I've pasted this in here. Now, if I run it, I'm going to get 10 seconds every time. So I got to do a tap dance for 10 seconds, but it will give me the results dumped out at the bottom here. And, you know, this is just kind of a way of looking at the particular information that's being run. But I want to know a little bit more, right? So I'm going to turn on what's called server timings. I'll also turn on query plan. Don't get excited, SQL people. I'm not going to go too much into the query plan stuff. That's probably where you're the most comfortable. But once I have turned these on, I've clicked these buttons. I'm going to click this clear on run. What that's going to do is now every time I run the query, it's going to clear the cache first. And I'm going to hit run again. And so now you can see I've cleared the cache and it's running again. Again, you really don't know anything. You don't need to know anything special about DAX at this point, right? All we've done is we've clicked on that and copied it in here. And now I'm going to go to server timings. And I'm going to scroll this up here. Now, very quickly, if you're a SQL person, you should be seeing that here's what looks like SQL here. This is actually called XM SQL. It's yet again another one of these SQL-esque languages, but this is how the storage engine processes queries. It breaks it down into this XM SQL here. You could learn a lot just by looking at this column here, which is the rows returned. And then kind of getting a sense of the overall time and this breakdown here. I'm going to explain that real quick. But just from copying that in here, turning these two on and running it, I could see a bunch of these are returning 18,000 rows. And then we kind of go down to the smaller levels here. There's a lot more advanced that you can do here. Like when I look at this, anything bold I see, there's problems with the logic. So that's why it's bolded out like that. Very quickly, Vertipack has two engines to it. It has one that's called a formula engine and one that's called the storage engine. Just as an indication of how well I did making this a crappy visual. It should be balanced. Really, it should be overwhelmingly storage engine time, not formula engine time. And so you can see that it's probably like 99.7% formula engine and only 0.3% storage engine. It's just it's like a yardstick measure. There's no right number that it's supposed to be. There's no right breakdown of what it's supposed to be, but that's what that could tell me. So very quickly, I can see just from copying that DAX out, pasting it in DAX Studio and executing it, right away I can start to get a sense of what is that visual doing. I mean, I can look at this and see, well, okay, it's pulling a couple things from that dim customer, and I can start to look at either the joins here. It's close enough to SQL, I think, that you can really get a sense of it, what's going on. So that's kind of our first level of, I've got a slow visual, I've downloaded the PBIX, and I want to take a look at, what's going slow. Is it the DAX? Is it, there's too many visuals on the page. I've clicked on this copied to get it into my clipboard. And then I open up DAX Studio. Either I run it by itself or I open it from here. I pasted it in this query, turned on query plan and server timings, and I've just run it. And, very quickly I can get a sense that, this took 8 seconds here, very formula engine heavy. And I don't know the actual total amount of rows that I have here, but I can probably get a sense that it's not the most efficient because it's trying to do this query set here over and over again. So that's a quick flyby of that first part. Let's go ahead back to Jocelyn. I'm going to stop sharing and let's go into the next section.
Awesome. So the next section brings us to the import mode and dataset refreshes, or semantic model refreshes, I should say. So Dan did touch upon this, as it runs on that Vertipack engine. And what we want to do first is take a look at the different types of storage modes that Power BI has. So initially, Power BI has 3 main storage modes, and that is import mode, direct query mode, and dual storage mode. Dual storage mode does use Vertipack, but for the sake of this presentation, we're just going to focus on import mode versus direct query. So first off, what is import mode? Import mode, you'll see if you connect to a data set, it'll give you the option if you want to import it directly or direct query it. So most of the time, people will choose this import mode. And it is based on that Vertipack storage engine. So it basically takes that data and stores it in memory as a snapshot. And it stores it within a columnar structure, so it's easier to compress. And because you have imported that data and it takes it as a screenshot, once you publish to Power BI service, that data will need to be refreshed periodically to bring in new data. And another note is import mode is the most frequently used storage mode in Power BI. Because of that reason, you're going to be able to create visuals within that Power BI desktop file and be able to see data that comes with it. Now, on the flip side of that, direct query mode, no data is loaded initially. So when you try to create those reports, you may not see data directly, because what Power BI does is it queries the data sources as that query happens. So that underlying data source has data that is currently stored in there, and then Power Query sends that query back and forth to retrieve the data at that time. So like I mentioned before, data resides in that original source before, during, and after the query execution. So there's no movement of data, no duplication going on there. And so that is the main difference between direct query mode and import mode. Now, since we want to optimize the model a little bit more and have a little bit of more of a clear definition of what's going on with that Vertipack engine, we're going to take a deeper look into import mode and what that means for a semantic model refresh within Power BI service. So the steps that are taken when a Power BI report is refreshed in Power BI service: initially, you create this wonderful Power BI semantic model in Power BI desktop, super proud of it. Then you want to publish to Power BI service, and then initially that refresh is kicked off. Then Power BI creates a copy of that model that includes the new data. So it takes that old file, initially copies it, that brings in the new data. Oh, I missed a key point here. So an important point to note here is that when Power BI doubles that data, it does double the memory footprint during the refresh. So you'll notice that if you look into the back end of what's happening within this semantic model refresh, you'll notice almost a spike in this refresh, and that's because it is taking that data and almost copying it and doubling it. Then towards the end of the refresh, Power BI switches to use the new model that also has all of the new data. So essentially, during these refreshes, it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on because you don't really have that metadata at your fingertips within Power BI. So what we can do is, when you have a Power BI semantic model refresh in import mode, we can take a SQL profiler and really dig into any slow data sources and any modeling issues that we're running into during that refresh. Now I'll kick it over to Dan, and he'll give you just a short demo on what to do if we can see a slow semantic model refresh.
Really, she knows me enough that it's not going to be a short refresh, but she's just an optimist, hoping she can eat dinner at some point. So I'm going to go back to my Power BI desktop and just kind of cover a couple other things about import mode. If you are looking at that PBIX that you have downloaded, it actually makes a difference how many icons appear over here. If you've got 4 icons, that means that it's an import model, and you can actually go look at the data in the particular tables. If it does not have this table view, it just has this and this, and then if you have that turned on, the DAX query view, that means it's running in either live mode or direct query mode, in the sense that the data sits in a remote location, and what Power BI Desktop is doing is creating DAX queries, or it's creating SQL on the fly to query those remote devices using a connector. I say that because one of the reasons import models are more popular and preferred is because performance people like myself will tell you that it is the fastest Power BI data set that you can have. I have a whole presentation that I've done on DAX performance and like VertPack performance. I could glaze your eyes on it about the compression engine that VertPack has. And quite when I first started and learned of this whole thing was Power Pivot in Excel, because suddenly I didn't have that row limitation anymore that I had in Excel. I don't remember what the max row limitation was in Excel, but suddenly once Power Pivot came on the scene, you could absolutely blow out as far as the number of rows you wanted. Because what VertiPack does is hyper optimize the compression of the data, and then it can load it up into memory. And so you are working with data that's stored in memory instead of disk, right? It kind of shifts from RAM instead of CPU and disk hardware driven technology. So what we're looking at here, this is an import model. These are all sitting on a SQL server, an Azure SQL server. I've connected to them. I've pulled the data in, and it's inside of Power BI Desktop here. I can do a refresh in Power BI Desktop, and I'm going to cancel that, but you saw that it popped up the visual there. I can refresh the data here, and then when I publish it to the service, Power BI needs to be able to refresh it as often as I want it if I want fresh data. So going back to, I want to just point this out again. So this is DAX Studio. If you remember it, I talked about this here, 6159. We'll see if I can actually remember it. Remember that this is an instance of Analysis Services that's running on your desktop. And so because of that, I can go into SQL Profiler, and I can actually attach to that instance, and I can instrument that refresh and get a sense of what's going on during that refresh. So that's what I'm going to walk through here. I'm going to do a new trace. I already forgot. 60159.
60159. Yep.
Jocelyn is used to working with the aged. She had that ready. There we go. So I'm going to connect to that. I'm going to use just a blank template. I'm not going to worry about saving it to file or anything like that. It's usually not going to get that big that it's an issue. And so if you have used Profiler before, you know that each one of these events has sub-events, and you can kind of, pick and choose what you want. I'm going to go very bare bones on this because we're going to actually use a template that somebody has out there in a blog post that I'll include at the end of the presentation. But I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose Job Graph, and I'm going to go to Progress Reports and Progress Report End. It's really the only two that I need to do. Now, when I hit run, it's going to attach. And now when I go into here, this is the part of the, where I'm worried about how long it's going to take. I'm not sure if it's going to be quick or not, but I'm going to hit this refresh in Power BI Desktop, and then I'm going to watch it here in SQL Profiler. At this point, there's always kind of a lag here while it kind of goes through its internal calculations and stuff. But again, remember, it's going to pull all that data down. It's going to build a new data set with the newest data. It's going to do its calculations, relationships, all that kind of stuff. And then Power BI switches from the old data set to the new. That actually goes on in the service as well. That's what Jocelyn was explaining with the memory size. That gets to be a big deal when you're talking about Power BI capacities that are a certain size, and you start approaching that size limit, it's going to be a problem when you refresh. So we're starting to get information coming down here. And so you can see, here's my progress report ends. And if I want to click through each one of these, I can kind of get a sense of what it's doing. And then when it's done, we get this job graph here. Let me see if this is actually done. Yeah, this is already done refreshing. The next step that I want to do is I want to save this as a trace XML file. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to load this into a particular template. Okay, so I'm going to call this refresh 2 because, like so many other IT people, I have zero imagination. Refresh 2, we'll just call it that. And so now I'm going to go to, this is the blog post. Phil Seamark is a Microsoft employee, and he's very much a geek. And so what he built is this template that I can load that trace into, and it's going to give me a breakdown of how long each one of those tables took to load. So we're going to go ahead and see if I can pull that off. Let me go here. I'm going to open up here. Analyze my refresh. Actually, no, I didn't have it open. So this is a PBIX file. Let me slide this over here. And what I'm going to do is he has it set up with a parameter. So when you open up the file, it's going to try to find his original file that he created it with. We're going to change that parameter to point to that trace file I just created and load it in. And because Power BI is Power BI, it keeps jumping to my other monitor. But there we go. So I'm going to go to this here, and I'm going to go to Edit Parameters. And I'm going to get that location where I just saved that. And I called it Fresh Space 2. Okay, so delete, refresh 2.xml. See if I spelled that right. Okay. And now I still have to do a refresh. I'm not pulling data from a remote location, but I'm pulling it from the desktop. So it needs to load that up. So now it's going to go through this thing again. And yeah, I didn't spell it right. Awesome.
I believe you may have used a bracket instead of a slash.
In here?
When you specified the, yep.
Nice. How did I manage that? Whew, thank you for catching that. We'll just hit refresh again. Now, this is going to be somewhat trivial, right? I don't have a ton of data here, but you can imagine if some of these refreshes take hours, because they can, this kind of gives you that chance to start to drill in and see, okay, here's how long this one took. I can very quickly see, what took the longest to load. Is the time predominantly because of the SQL, or is it because of the processing that I'm doing of the particular tables? So this is a pretty neat template to hang on to. If you are a profiler whiz, you could probably just pick that out of here. Again, all we did was progress report end. So as it's doing each hierarchy or doing each table, you're getting the progress report end, with the particular duration and that kind of stuff. So that is the Analyze My Refresh template. Now, I want to point out that if you have a Power BI premium capacity, so let's try and do this live and see if this will work. So if you notice, I've got this Power BI premium per user content. I've got a little diamond up there. What that means is if I go into, not there, here, into that semantic model, and I go to server settings, this is the endpoint for the published data set in the Power BI service. And I can actually connect to this again with Power BI with this SQL profiler. So I'm going to shut that off and I'm going to do a new trace. And this time I'm going to paste that full thing in here and clean it up a little bit. Take out that data source equals. Take out the initial catalog. And then I'm going to connect. And right away, it's going to start giving me, let's see here, universal MFA. See if we can test my typing ability. Let me swing that over here. That was just MFA authentication. Let's go and see if I can do it here. Again, I'm just trying to get in and browse that server. I think this is the MFA stuff hanging me up. We were talking about jumping out of an airplane and the cheap thrill of these kind of things. That's what live demos are. I always think like, why can't I just record this and press play? But what's the fun in that? Let's see here, 89. Go in. Yeah, all right, let me take a look at this real quick. What did I do wrong? Performance demo, I dropped an S at the end, I think. No, I didn't. Well, maybe we'll come back to that. Maybe as we talk between the two, I'll see what I'm doing wrong. But with that particular address, you can connect SQL Profiler to the service and actually do that exact same capture of the refresh going on in the service. Sometimes you may want to do that. If something refreshes on your desktop, you publish it to the service and it fails up there, you can connect that way with SQL Profiler. But we'll stop the demo there and I'll see if I could frantically figure it out while Jocelyn goes on to the next piece.
Sounds good. And I don't have too much here in between demos.
I know, I gotta go fast.
No worries here. So the next topic that I'll talk briefly about, since Dan has already brought that up very briefly, is Power BI and Fabric capacities. So let's dive into a little bit more about what Fabric capacities, or Power BI and Fabric capacities, are. Originally, when you sign up for, actually, let's go back. A capacity is essentially a dedicated set of resources reserved for your use within the tenant. When you sign up for Power BI initially, you'll be attributed to a shared capacity, which is essentially the free version where it's the default. You're able to publish content to the Power BI service and share with your fellow members in your tenant. However, you don't have those added capabilities. So if you want to have bigger model sizes per se, or want to be able to refresh more than a couple times per day, you can opt to go up to a premium capacity. And these premium capacities are noted in Power BI workspaces with that little diamond icon. So you'll know that you can connect to a log analytics workspace, for example, if you have that premium capacity. So what premium brings you is just more capabilities within your Power BI tenant. So you can do a little bit more, you can have a little bit bigger model sizes, you can share with more people, so on and so forth. And that brings us to Fabric capacities. So Fabric capacities kind of build on those Power BI premium capacities, and they provide computing power to meet customer demand. So you can also upgrade to additional SKUs or SKUs if you need any more computing power or any additional resources for your Power BI data models. One thing to note about Fabric capacities is this allows for bursting and smoothing. So if or when you consume extra compute resources beyond what you've purchased, it allows you to kind of smooth the CPUs that you have consumed to ease that within your tenant. So why should we care about Power BI or Fabric capacities? A poorly performing Power BI report can affect your entire capacity. So if you have data set refreshes that are taking too long, or if you have these capacity spikes, it can incur additional costs to you and your tenant. So what can we do about this? What's great about having a premium capacity is that you can implement what's called a Fabric capacity app. And what this does is essentially creates a Power BI report based on the consumption that you're using within your tenant or workspace, and shows you exactly what's going on, what reports are consuming the most capacity or CPU, and gives you a little bit of a higher level detail about what's going on within your specific workspace. But again, like I mentioned, this is pretty high level. So what we can do to dig a little bit deeper into the details, get really nitty gritty about what queries are taking too long, what visuals may be taking a long time to refresh, or what really is impacting your capacity, is using Azure Log Analytics. So what we can do from here is initially hook up your Power BI Premium Capacity workspace to an Azure Log Analytics workspace and begin logging. So whenever a Power BI semantic model is refreshed within your Premium Capacity workspace, you can see exactly what's going on behind those refreshes. You can see what actions users are taking within your reports that may also be causing these capacity spikes. So with that being said, Dan, I hope you found what you were looking for, because I'm going to pass it off to you one more time.
Yeah,
for
I was saying in the chat, it's one of two things. It's so when I did the demos, I just did the desktop connection, right? And then kind of on the fly, like an idiot, I was like, well, hey, let me demo connecting in the service. Um, I think it's either because I have a PPU version, so it's premium per
Gotcha.
user instead of a full premium capacity, or maybe it's because in our lab, we're actually guest users in our lab. It's not our actual 3Cloud account, and it could be some of the conflict there. You'll just have to take me at my word that it actually works. You can do those live captures. Um,
I
all
trust you.
right. Well, thank you. I know you've seen
You
it
will.
before. All right. So let me jump in here and just very quickly go over this. I'm not going to go over this in detail. Some of it's because this is our lab environment. I didn't want to get too pummeling around in here. But when she was talking about the Fabric Capacity app, I put the link in the chat. This is the kind of visualization that you get. And so you can get a sense of, what is using up your capacity. This is just a different visualization as to, what is using up most of it through that time. You can pick particular, if there's a big spike or something, you can do it here and click on Explore, and then that takes you into like a very focused view of what's going on. The problem I've had with this one is just it kind of stops at the data set level. It will tell you data set level or fabric capacity item level. It really doesn't get down even into the report. And some customers could have multiple reports attached to the same data set. That particular time that I picked was just background operations. So in fabric capacity or premium capacity speak, background operations are refreshes basically, and then interactive operations is people actually using the report, clicking on visuals, all that kind of stuff. So you can see like during this time here, nobody was even clicking on that. I just grabbed a random spot. It's all background refreshes. But let's shift gears and talk about log analytics. Log analytics, I'm pretty excited about. I finally uh, got off my butt and started using it and trying to understand it. I was a little intimidated by KQL just because it was like language fatigue of like yet another language that I'd have to learn or something like that. But I'm going to show you that that's not necessarily something you have to worry about. Azure Log Analytics is basically a service that Microsoft provides for very, very high volume logging data. You're charged on a capacity instance, I think, for it. But for our purposes, if I go into my workspace, I'm back in my performance demo workspace, and I'm going to go to my semantic model, and I'm going to go to settings, and then I'm going to realize I did the wrong thing. So I'm going to smoothly come back here, go to workplace settings, and to Azure connections. I can take this workspace and tell it to pipe all of its analytic, like its logging data into this workspace here. And so this is managed data log analytics. And if I flip to it over here, this is the log analytics workspace in Azure. When I come in here, I'm going to just kind of walk through a little bit of the information that's captured. We're close on time, so I'm going to fly through it really. But when you click on logs in that workspace, you get this kind of like pre-canned query page that will do you no good if you're a Power BI person because none of these have anything to do with Power BI. So you just clear that. If you're in kind of the classic mode, you will see something up here that says, try the new log analytics or something like that. I just saw that earlier today and I already forgot what the actual terminology is. We are in the new view here, and this is the simple mode that comes up. You can switch over to KQL mode and write your own queries if you wish, but this simple mode is really cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say select a table. You will probably have a whole bunch of tables here if anyone else is logging to this same workspace. For me, you could see you've got these ADF ones that are logging here, but really the only one I worry about is this Power BI datasets workspace. In simple mode, once I connect to that table, it's going to show me all of the columns here. Anybody that's sharp-eyed or familiar with Profiler, these are the same kind of events that you get logged in Profiler, right? So now it's available in Log Analytics, and I can do stuff like filter. I can sort. I can go over to here and look at the time that it took, and I can sort by time, and right away, what floats up to the top are these long queries here of that, that visual sitting there spinning while I was trying to do my ugly DAX. If you expand this, this is the kind of information that's available to you here. This correlation ID can help identify. I think you can use that pretty much to get all of the visuals for a particular report together. You could use that to filter on. Here's your workspace ID. This application context section here will tell you what data set and what report it was working on. So you can get a sense that you're really getting kind of detailed information here. If you go to event text, again, as profiler people, event text, right? That's like profiler talk. This is the actual DAX query that was run that took 14 seconds. Now, if you remember, I told you anytime I see underscore underscore DS0, that means it's Microsoft code that they wrote, the generic code for the visuals. So I can tell that this is a particular visual that I deliberately wrote poorly, the measure behind it. And that could tell me that, hey, this is the one that took 14 seconds. And right away, I can zoom in that. Even better, in a large enterprise, I can see who executed that. Who was the person that did it? So I can go to them and talk to them and understand what they're doing. I think this, I will say this, I keep forgetting to do this, and I think Jocelyn might have thankfully gotten off the call before I stumbled in front of the customer today that I was showing this to. 1,000 is not a lot. You get into a busy environment, you probably want to hit max limit or 15,000. I was demoing for a customer. I couldn't find the particular thing we were looking for, and it was because this default limit of 1,000 here. But if you pump that up to max limit or 15,000, you can make sure to avoid that gaffe and silently thank me for screwing up for you. Again, KQL mode, if you want to see what one of those looks like, do I have, well, you know what, I can do this. If you haven't seen KQL before, you still won't because I'm on the wrong view. There we go. Nope, that's not it either. It's kind of interesting to look at. Let me see if I have one available here in my deck notes. Let me see if I've got that. I sure don't. Nice. KQL is just, it's kind of interesting because the way it's written out, it looks like the way SQL actually analyzes things. Let's do this. Let's go here. Let's go back to there. Let's go into logs. And let's just run one of these. That's interesting. It doesn't let me switch and see. There it is. Okay. So the way they're written here, this is the table, and then you have your where statement right away, and then your sort and limit. So this would be, select star from CCF application logs where level equals fail, sort by limit 100, right? So, I mean, it's not, if you have a grasp on T-SQL, which I'm going to assume you do, this is not terrible, but I gotta be honest with you, this simple mode, for what I've tried to do, especially if I'm looking around at things, select a table, pick that table, and then you're interacting with it here. I mean, you can filter, you can put rules in place, you can do a text search on your event text column. So there's a lot of powerful things in here. I do have the opportunity with 3Cloud's relationship with Microsoft that I've been able to talk to some of the admin PMs, and they're really stressing, this log analytics, they're going to be doing more and more with what they can send over into log analytics. So it's definitely an investment. If you're looking at Power BI performance, play around with it, get comfortable with that. It's really the best way to get this kind of, the real detailed level. Final comment on this, the refreshes will show up in here as well. So instead of having to attach Profiler to that data set and stumble all over like I did, you could come in here and let's see, do I have any in here? Yes, I do. If I go to here and I go to progress report end, that's the same progress report end that we saw in that refresh that I was doing. And so you can get a sense of how long each one of these tables is taking. You could pull that out of this particular thing here out of Log Analytics. And again, you can imagine if you put together some snappy queries, this could be as routine as going into Log Analytics, loading a query, and then boom, this is the table that took an hour in your hour and a half refresh. So that's Log Analytics. I think we'll stop there. That's a full went over a little bit. Do we have any more slides left? I think we do. Yes. I'll speak to this one. If you want to come work with Jocelyn and I, this just went up today. We are looking for Azure SQL DBA on our team to work with customers. So shameless plug there. We'll copy that into the chat as well if you want to review that job. But thanks for joining us. And we didn't leave any time for questions, but you're on mute there, Christina.
There you go. One of those days. Yeah, we didn't have a lot of questions come through, and we, unless you all have a hard stop, we don't normally have, right at 7, you got to cut it off, click.
Okay.
I actually do have a few questions if you have a few
Sure.
more minutes.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much. This is really, really well done. Some just fantastic information. I really appreciate it. I know I'll be actually taking this video and going back and looking at things over and over. So thank you. But so one of the things when you went into the log analytics page, does that require like certain permissions to be able to go into there?
Yep, good call out. 2 sets of permissions. So to go into the workspace settings and set it to log analytics, your tenant administrator would have to do that. Whatever you call it, tenant administrator, Power BI administrator, top level person is the one that can set that up. And then
that workspace has to be premium capacity as well.
Right, has to be premium capacity. And then that same farm admin needs to have the right permissions to that workspace, to be able to write the detail in there. Yeah. So yes, there is some setup. There is an article. I'm going to grab that real quick and throw it in here about setting that up. So good call out.
Seen that button, the log analytics button in the tenant, and I'm always like, I don't know if I should click that or not. I don't know what it is, which leads me to my second question. Is there an additional charge, do you know, for that?
Yes.
There is. Does it have it in this article here? There is a storage charge. I think it's mostly like the amount of data you store. It's pretty trivial. It's
storage charges usually are for those things. So that's good.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it's a lot. It's just one of those things you might want to try to remember to turn it off afterwards and dump the data type thing. But it's trivial unless you're one of my customers that's putting terabytes of data in there, and that's really expensive. But you're not going to generate that much from your Power BI workspace.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess that also was my last question, and that's on like that time range button you had in there. Is there a limit to that, or because when you showed me like the who did what thing, I was like, I may need to like store some of that and look at it, later.
In log analytics? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and it showed like there was a time range. I think you were looking at it for about 24 hours, but sometimes I'm not told about things until much later that I was like.
Well, here's the catcher for that. Once you turn on log analytics, it's just going to keep it there, right?
Okay.
What invariably happens is you're going to hear about it after the fact. Somebody's going to be complaining that it was slow, and then you go turn it on, and then you wait for it to happen again, type thing. That's the 2 ways to do it. If you just have it running, you could go all the way up to custom here, and whatever amount of data you've collected, it's all empty here because I barely have any in there. But as much as you want to pay for, you can you can capture.
For the storage. Awesome. So
And
a
here-
little bit like query store or extended events, maybe.
Yeah, you're skirting on the edge of my SQL knowledge there, but you could see, I mean, I don't have much to show here, I guess, but pay as you go, I guess it's 276 a gig. I
Okay.
think a month would be,
Okay.
so that's the scope you're talking about here.
Yeah, that's
As
nothing.
far as that goes. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Oh, you've given me so many things to play with. I really appreciate it. And I didn't even realize, Joyce, you were mentioning earlier that how that when you copy that data in the tabular model, you're using kind of twice that memory. Like now that you said it, it makes sense, but it just never occurred to me before. So I'm like, oh, okay.
And it's funny because you will see that on the back end if you do start logging this information. So if you didn't know that before, you'd be a huge question of why is that happening? So yeah, it was really interesting for me to learn that as well.
It goes into one of those admin things is keeping track of when your data sets are refreshing. Because what happens is some people want to refresh during the day or they're international customers or whatever. And so now you're refreshing that data set right away. You're using up, double your data set size of memory. Now, a year ago, it all used to be in like a consistent mass, and you could take out your interactive stuff. Now they at least have it split. If you're in a premium capacity, that you have this interactive and you have this back end. If you're a pro customer at a shared capacity, I think it's a little blurrier as far as
it's a little bit more
how that goes.
constricted.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you both again. Lots of good stuff. Gosh.
Yeah. Any more questions? I mean, it's a huge amount of information in a short time. So, and honestly,
You covered it well, though. Glad it was recorded.
Yeah. We've got other follow-up type things like the whole compression thing. You can dive into that. The whole model design that Jocelyn was talking about. We didn't talk about that at all. I'll leave that to your appetite. If your attendees are interested, we can come back and do something like that at a later time for sure.
Would love it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I had about the same question on log analytics too, because I know we had it turned down a few years ago when it was kind of new and someone was kind of wondering about the cost. I think we basically just went ahead and just grabbed the data and stored it in data lake storage yourselves. I think using the APIs or something.
Yeah. So that'd be smarter, cheaper that way.
Yeah. So thanks. And I missed part. I was doing a food run. You guys might not know what runs is. Christina's.
Are you from Nebraska, Donald?
Yes, I'm Kearney, Nebraska. You can see.
Okay.
It's, by the way, if you look at it, I mean, runs are just like, it's like Nebraska, Iowa, I don't know, maybe Kansas has some. It's like a stuffed hamburger thing, whatever. Anyway.
Nice.
But thanks, I missed a little bit, so I'll go back and catch up because I was curious about that part. But nice meeting you guys.
As a final piece there, I'm semi-obsessed with this kind of stuff. So I would encourage you, Christina's already connected on LinkedIn. That's a good thing on my last name. I'm pretty easy to find, although there are a few other Szepesi's out there. But feel free to hook up on LinkedIn. And if you've got questions, within reason, of course, I'll do my best to point you to resources or help you out as you dig through this stuff. So.
And me as well.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Yeah, definitely have a lot of questions down the road. You're going to regret hooking up with me on LinkedIn.
Not at all. Not at all. This is kind of what we work in nonstop. So we're immersed in this world for sure. And don't forget, we're hiring.
Yep, I have somebody I may have in mind for that as well. So
Excellent.
We'll send them your way. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great content. And thanks for joining us.
Awesome.
Thank you both.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.